Hey everyone, this is Turd Flinging Monkey. So, the other day I was watching a video from Coltane called The Bigger Picture. Now, I haven't watched a Coltane video in I don't know how long. I don't really have time to watch much YouTube at all, but I was just surfing through YouTube for whatever reason, I don't even remember why, and I just saw his video on my feed, and I'm like, I haven't watched a Coltane video in a while, and I checked it out. And in this video, and I'll link it in the description if anyone's curious, he postulates about the nature of gynocentrism, how and why a society becomes gynocentric. And his theory, if I understand it correctly, and I haven't followed his channel, religiously or anything, is he blames birth control and the material abundance of Western countries for the rise of gynocentrism and so forth. And I really think he's way, way off base. But then again, it does make sense, and I'll talk about that later. But let me break it down very simply, and I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I'll tell you exactly what it is, and then I'll explain it. The mechanism of gynocentrism, or the mechanism of the rise of gynocentrism, is when women don't need men, when they don't physically need men, they become gynocentric, feminist, whatever. The way to prevent gynocentrism is you have to make sure that women continue to need men. The second they don't need men anymore, they become gynocentric feminists. So consider female nature. Women don't really love men. Men are just a means. They're not just resources. Like if a woman just came upon a cache of resources, that doesn't guarantee her reproductive success in and of itself. A man also needs to protect and provide for her throughout her pregnancy, nursing, all that fun stuff, until the children are grown. Women still value men for their utility. And this valuation of men is directly proportional to their need for men. As long as women are vulnerable, and they need a man for his protection and provision, they value men. In fact, they value men so much that they willingly submit to them. However, when those needs are replaced through technology or government, the women don't need the men anymore, and they start not submitting, to put it lightly. Now in Coltane's video, he points out that welfare states existed before birth control, but he misses the point of the function of welfare. In the beginning, welfare was kind of like a pension system for workers. It wasn't free money to poor people, it was a pension. You had to work to earn that pension. This is why welfare, when it was first created, didn't lead to rampant gynocentrism. Because only the workers qualified for the welfare benefit. If a woman wanted to be protected and provided for financially, she still needed a man. Because she wasn't working, she was raising the kids. It was the man who was working, thus it was the man that had the benefit. If she wanted that benefit for herself, she needed the man. It wasn't until the 60s, with the expansion of welfare, where money was just given to poor people, especially single mothers, that women no longer needed men. They can just attach their wagon directly to the government, thus bypassing the man, and then you see the rise of gynocentrism. It wasn't just female voting. It wasn't just the welfare state, it wasn't just the material abundance of the West. All those things worked together to create an environment where the man's role was replaced. Now the man's traditional role as protector and provider was partially made obsolete by technical innovation, the Industrial Revolution and later the Technology Revolution. In this way, women didn't necessarily need to rely on men to make the money. When income was earned primarily through farming and agriculture, you really needed a man. Women just simply weren't physically strong enough to do the work on the farm necessary to earn the money. They needed a man because only men were strong enough to do so. I mean, there might have been some very rare women who were just like freaks of nature that actually could farm with the boys, but for the most part, simply because of sexual dimorphism, the women couldn't farm with the men, so they were reliant on the men. So they accepted their role and they submitted to the men because the alternative was death. Nowadays, you have cushy, air-conditioned office jobs that, while a woman may not be able to compete at the full level of a man because she'll have to take time off to raise kids, there might be a few IQ points difference and so forth, she could do more or less enough to survive on her own. She's no longer wholly dependent on a man for her income. So that's item 1. Item 2 is, of course, the welfare state. Before, if a woman wasn't married in her 30s and she became an old maid, she was kind of fucked. She didn't have anyone to take care of her. If she wanted to have kids, she could in a way, but who would support her? who would provide for her while she was pregnant, while she was nursing, while her children were young. Becoming a single mother was a one-way ticket to lifelong poverty, and it still is despite the welfare state. But the welfare state and its plethora of programs have made being in poverty relatively cushy. It's no picnic, but you're not going to starve to death. In fact, some of the fattest people in America are the poorest people. Obesity and poverty go hand in hand for the first time in human history. So we have two elements, which replace the woman's need for the man, which coincided with the rise of gynocentrism. Now then you have birth control, which, how does it replace the woman's need for the man? It doesn't. It just happened to be invented around that time. It doesn't fit the pattern. It's a red herring. Now I'm not saying birth control wasn't significant. It gave women more control over their cycle and when they reproduced and when they didn't. Maybe it didn't lead to so many shotgun marriages. It let women be more promiscuous without the worry of being pregnant. So there were changes in society and in social norms, but it didn't lead directly to the rise of gynocentrism. Pointing to birth control as the silver bullet that led to this rise is stupid. It doesn't fit the pattern. The clear pattern is, when women no longer need men, they betray men. And as soon as they need men again, they come running back with their arms outstretched, ready for that warm embrace. I'm so sorry, we were so stupid. Feminism was wrong, we love you, come back to us. And then like idiots, of course, the men go back. And then as soon as the things die down, as soon as the threat is past, as soon as the man's role has been outsourced to technology or government, and the women no longer need the men, they betray the men once again. And that's the history of gynocentrism. Has nothing to do with birth control at all. Do you want my proof? I don't need to look at all these different historical things. I could look at a culture that exists to this day that has access to birth control, and yet the divorce rate is less than 1%. And that's the Amish. There's two reasons why the Amish have such a low divorce rate. It has nothing to do with the religion. Islam doesn't have no-fault divorce either, and yet the divorce rate in Saudi Arabia is over 50%, just like in America. The reason why the Amish have such a low divorce rate: the Amish are exempt from paying Social Security taxes and are not eligible for Social Security and disability benefits. They have exempted themselves from the welfare state. And they're farmers. They work with their hands. They do jobs that require men. So the men are needed in Amish communities, and they don't have a welfare state. So the women, they submit to the men? What? Women submitting to men? How could this be? Clearly they have internalized misogyny. No, it's not about misogyny. It's about women needing men. When men are needed, the women will submit. When the men are no longer needed, they will turn on the men. Society will become gynocentric. Now, women voting is really stupid. I would call women voting a watershed moment. It's when you've passed the point of no return, because you can no longer reform the system once women can vote, because they're half the population. But that's not the origin of gynocentrism. Neither is the Industrial Revolution the origin of gynocentrism. In any situation where women no longer need men, this will happen. In ancient Rome, when they had the slaves doing all the work, and the women were no longer relying on their husbands for income because they had their own slaves and their own income, they had a little feminist movement in ancient Rome. It doesn't matter what the mechanism is. You don't need industrialization. You just need a situation where women can get by on their own, and they'll stop submitting to men. I mean, this makes intuitive sense. Imagine, again, using the child example. We're going to think of women as children because they are. I want you to think about when you were a child. You didn't like submitting to your parents. You didn't like doing what your parents told you to do. Now, I'm not talking about abusive, drunk alcoholic parents. I'm just talking about normal parents that told you to go to bed and brush your teeth. You didn't like listening to them, and sometimes they might have had to spank you or yell at you to get you to listen. But you were reliant on them. They paid your bills, they bought you clothes, and they loved you. And because of that, you submitted to them. You trusted that they had your best interests at heart. Now imagine you were brought up to be very respectful and obedient to your parents, and then you traveled to some new country, and in this country, the government provided everything the children needed, and you no longer needed to rely on your parents. how many children would remain obedient and respectful of their parents in that environment? Just think about it. If you were a child and you went to this country where the government fed you and the government clothed you, the government gave you a place to stay, gave you everything you needed, what reason would you have to respect your parents anymore? You no longer needed them. At the very least, you would demand equality. You would demand mutual respect. You would certainly not be obedient to them. You would make ludicrous demands, and the parents would have to negotiate with you, and it would just get out of control. And that's essentially what we have now. But the situation isn't unique to this culture or this time. Any culture, any time period where the women no longer need the men, this will happen in one form or another. If you want to stop gynocentrism from happening, all you have to do is ensure that women need men. And I mean physically need men. Now, it's true with the welfare state, the government still needs men's tax money, and like an ex-wife needs a man to pay her alimony and child support, so they need men in a way, but they don't physically need the man, they just need his money. And you certainly don't need to submit to someone to get their money. In fact, you can enslave them and get their money. If you want to prevent gynocentrism, you have to create a situation where the women must submit to the men in order to survive. Now, the Amish figured it out. They exempted themselves from the welfare state, and they're farmers. They don't have all this technology, which alleviates the need for men's labor. Now, it sucks for the man. I don't think, guys enjoy working out in the sun for 12 hours a day and building delightful little wooden sheds, but that's what they do. And as a result, they have a divorce rate less than 1%. I mean, that's the secret ingredient. It's really very intuitive. When women need men, they submit. There's not gynocentrism, there's patriarchy, there's balance. When women no longer need men, through technology, mostly government, they turn on men. They become feminists, they start dyeing their armpit hair blue and do all kinds of stupid shit. And that will continue to happen until they need men again. Now, I predict this will happen when there's a financial collapse. When the government gravy train runs out and they realize that they're not eating anymore. They'll suddenly rediscover their respect for men when the streets are dangerous and they're starving. They'll suddenly remember, oh shit, I need men. I guess I'm not as strong and independent as I thought, but until that day, as long as the government keeps giving them money, as long as the government keeps replacing that role that a man provides to a woman, they're going to be cunts, and there's nothing men can do about it. Now, I'm not saying birth control pills don't have some effect on female behavior, but they certainly don't replace women's need for men. It's not because I can't get pregnant anymore because I'm on the pill. I guess I can do whatever the fuck I want. Like, you can give birth control pills to Amish women. It's not going to change their culture because the Amish women still need the men to go out and farm, and they don't have the welfare state to back them up. So the divorce rate isn't going to skyrocket in the Amish despite the birth control pill. It's a complete non-issue red herring. I mean, the welfare state is by far the biggest factor. That is what really just lit the fire of gynocentrism. But even in small degrees with the technological innovation, the changes in the job market going from manual labor to more office jobs, this would happen to a small degree anyway. The less women need men, the more gynocentric, the more feminist they become, the less they want to submit to men. So even without the welfare state, without no-fault divorce, without all these laws, which basically give women an out where they truly do not need men, you'd still see the inklings, the beginnings, some kind of proto-feminist movement, as women were able to enter the workforce and earn their own incomes, and they were less reliant on men in that way. It just wouldn't be as bad. What really kicked off the feminist movement was the expansion of the welfare state, which went from a pension for workers to simply largesse for the poor, especially single mothers, as part of the Great Society. That's what gave women the green light to throw men under the bus. They don't need men anymore, the government's going to take care of them. And as long as that's the case, you're going to have feminism. You're going to have gynocentrism. I mean, you'll probably still have gynocentrism to some degree, because men want to please women. It's just part of our mating strategy. It's a trade-off. If you want a technologically advanced civilization with easy air-conditioned office jobs, You're going to have women trying to get a piece of that, trying to be more independent, becoming feminist cunts. You want a country that takes care of the poor and has a safety net, you're going to have gynocentrism and feminism. Because women are going to abuse the shit out of that so that they don't need men anymore. But it's not so much about admitting defeat as it is admitting just how futile and insignificant it all is. All that really matters at the end of the day is you. Are you happy? Are you doing what you want in life? If you're not, make the changes that you need to make in your life to become happy and do what you want. Those are my thoughts. This is Turd Flinging Monkey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.